Yo, 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 YouTube, what is up? Welcome to the BK Lounge. It is Wednesday, November 20th, 2019. Hopefully everyone's having a good week so far. Already Wednesday, man. Kind of nice. We're getting close to football. Shouldn't say that. We already have some action going on tonight. Some football I can degenerately bet on, which is what video, sort of a state of the program video. I haven't done any YouTube hits since the post-game reaction to Iowa State this past Saturday. So a little bit to catch up on. If you listen to The Horn, the midday show with Trey and BK, maybe you've heard some of these things we're going to discuss in this video, but I'll hit some new things for sure. And then start to preview Texas and Baylor coming up this Saturday in Waco. I'm trying to think how many more of these videos I'll be able to do this week. I'll be at the Texans-Colts game tomorrow down in Houston. Pretty excited for that one. Probably no video tomorrow, maybe something on Friday afternoon, Friday evening. A little bit more preview of Baylor. But we'll look ahead to what type of challenges the Bears present to the Longhorns this weekend. Of course, Baylor coming off of its first loss of the 2019 season, a heartbreaker, just a collapse. Against Oklahoma, blowing a 28-3 lead a la Atlanta Falcons, which you never, ever, ever want to be compared to the Falcons or, hell, any Georgia sports team when it comes to choking. There's some state law in Georgia where you have to choke any big-time sporting event that you play in. Baylor had that game in hand, 28-3 early on, and couldn't get stops in the second half, and couldn't get things going offensively in the final 30 minutes. So we'll talk about Baylor. Still a very good football team. Considering how poorly Texas has played over the last couple of weeks, we're likely to see a rematch of Baylor-Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. But we're going to focus on Texas and Baylor this weekend and kind of discuss where this Texas football team is at mindset-wise, because it's a kind of polar opposite ends of the spectrum to where this team could be mentally going into this matchup in Waco. And then also at the end of this video, we'll talk some Texas hoops, man. Texas basketball hasn't played a game since this past Friday. They looked relatively average against Prairie View A&M. The game was close at halftime, and Texas struggled a lot more than they needed to. Stop me if you've heard that, right? A Texas team, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, whoever, playing down to its competition. That happened a little bit with the Longhorns this past Friday against Prairie View, but now a much tougher opponent coming up tomorrow night at Madison Square Garden, Texas taking on Georgetown. And if the Longhorns can knock off Patrick Ewing and the Hoyas, a likely date with the number one team in the land, the Duke Blue Devils, would follow on Friday. So we'll talk a little Texas hoops at the end of this video as well. If you are watching this live, feel free to hit the live chat going on right now. I tried one of these a couple of minutes ago, but had a little technical snafu, so restarted this video. So I don't know if anyone's watching right now, but if you are, I will check the live chat in a couple of minutes. And of course, if you're watching this after the fact, after it's already been posted, feel free to comment below, and I will try to get to your comments in a timely manner. So I know folks around here are pretty ticked off about Texas, Iowa State, and we're trying to move on. An extreme disappointment. This Longhorn football team suffered at Ames this past Saturday, and I just can't stop thinking about it, man. I mean, this is, regardless of what happens this weekend against Baylor, and regardless what happens Black Friday against Texas Tech, and even regardless what happens in the bowl game, this is a wasted season for the Texas Longhorns. I mean, Texas has a roster filled with NFL caliber talent, and for the first time since Colt McCoy took this team to a national championship, they had an elite upperclassman quarterback, and they've just wasted it. I mean, anytime you're at the University of Texas and you aren't competing for conference championships, that's disappointing in itself. But when you have an NFL talented roster, an elite upperclassman quarterback who was getting Heisman love before the season and is still one of the best statistical quarterbacks in college football this year, and you're in a bad Big 12 conference. I mean, this is a down year. Just look at the college football playoff rankings, right? Nobody is ranked in the top 8 in the Big 12 right now. This conference isn't getting a whole lot of love, and it's hard to criticize the committee. This is a down year for the Big 12. A lot of first-year head coaches, a lot of new, inexperienced, young quarterbacks on these teams. I mean, that combination, the talent, the quarterback you have, and the fact that this conference just isn't very good this year, it seems to be set up for Texas to make a run for the Big 12 championship here in 2019. But not only is that not the case, we've got 2 weeks left in the regular season, and the Longhorns are pretty much done. They're pretty much out of conference championship contention. So, once again, anytime Texas doesn't compete for a Big 12 title, it's disappointing. But, man, when you've got the quarterback you've got and the roster you've got and the conference you're playing in, this is an epic failure, what has happened to this football team in 2019. Now, I'm not saying don't watch. I'm not saying don't support the team. I'm not saying don't root for them against Baylor, against Texas Tech, and in the bowl game, because this team can go 9-4 if they win out, and 9-4 is a whole hell of a lot better than 7-6, or hell, this team could still go 6-7. God forbid, another losing season, not out of the question here in Austin, Texas. But 9-4 is obviously better than that, and you get some momentum going into next season. There's no doubt. But man, I just can't help but thinking that this is an epic failure. And maybe the loss to Iowa State isn't the worst loss that Texas has had this year, right? TCU, a worse football team than Iowa State. TCU is going to struggle to get to 6-6 this year. That's disappointing. And Texas was favored in that game up in Fort Worth. And I know the Longhorns were 7-point underdogs at Iowa State. But man, this feels to me like a more crushing loss, the loss this past weekend to the Cyclones, because even after the loss to TCU, as bad as you looked in that football game, you still had the opportunity to win out and get to the Big 12 title game. Like, you got the help you needed. I know it was later in the day, but Oklahoma beat Baylor. And, I mean, if Texas would have beaten Iowa State on Saturday, then the Longhorns would have controlled their own destiny to get to Jerry World on December 7th. So that was the dagger. I mean, regardless of what people were saying before the year, and there were a ton of people around Austin. Hell, there were national analysts and pundits pegging Texas to make the college football playoff this year. Regardless of if you were there, I wasn't there. At minimum, you thought this would be a team playing in the Big 12 championship game. Like, maybe they weren't quite to the level of Oklahoma, but you figured they could at least get to the Big 12 title game in a down year in this league with all the talent that they have. And with 2 weeks to go in the regular season, the Longhorns aren't even in contention. I mean, that was the last. Why the Iowa State loss sucks so much is because, well, now all of the goals that Texas had going into the season are gone. They're gone. You know, maybe in the locker room they discussed college football playoff. Maybe they didn't. But I know for a fact the number one goal for Tom Herman and this football team going into 2019 was to win the conference championship. I mean, it's evaded this program for the last decade. Obviously, they played in the title game last year and came up just short to Oklahoma. Like, the number one goal for Texas in 2019 should have been, and it was, to win the Big 12 championship. If you have one loss, then you make the Final Four. That's great. If not, whatever. You're still taking a step in the right direction as a program if you can win the Big 12 title. That seemed like the obvious, logical next step after what happened last year. But now this team is sitting at 6-4. And 4-3 in the Big 12, 2 games back of anybody. Well, of Oklahoma and Baylor to have a chance to play for the Big 12 championship game. I mean, Texas would have to beat Baylor this weekend and then hope Baylor loses to Kansas in Lawrence next weekend, which probably isn't going to happen. And oh, by the way, that would only set up a 3-way tie scenario in the Big 12 unless Iowa State lost. So Longhorns not mathematically eliminated from Big 12 title contention. But they basically are, and that's disappointing because that was the biggest goal for this football team going into the 2019 season. So what about Baylor coming up on Saturday? What's going to happen with this Texas team? Are guys even going to be motivated to go out there after what happened last weekend in Ames and knowing that they really don't have a shot to play for a Big 12 championship this year? What's going to happen there? You know, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what to believe in. All right? There's been reports of a fracture within the locker room between the older guys and the younger guys. You know, Tom Herman talked about it during the bye week a couple of weeks ago that maybe the young guys aren't fully bought in and there's not enough young guys taking leadership roles for this football team. That could be a problem still. But even the seniors, even the upperclassmen on this football team, like, where are they at mentally? Are they still bought into Tom Herman? Do they still believe in the message that this coaching staff is trying to preach? Or are they saying, man, we're 6-4, we're doing all this work, This is a strict, rigid, tough program that Tom Herman runs here in Austin. We're doing all this work and nothing's happening. We're not seeing the results that we expected to see. It's a 6-4 football team right now. I wonder what the mindset is of Texas. Vegas thinks this will be a close game. The line opened at about 3.5 and 4. Money's coming in on Baylor, probably rightfully so. Baylor's up to 5.5-point favorite for this game. But still, that's one possession. That means this should be a close football game. And if you've watched either of these two teams play all year, all they do is play close football games. Texas has been in just about every single game they've played this year. And Baylor, my God, it's amazing that they only have one loss. A triple overtime game against TCU, a double overtime game against Texas Tech. They were just up by a point, I think, in the Oklahoma State game going into the fourth quarter. Obviously, what happened to Oklahoma, these two teams play a lot of close football games. So it feels like this should be a close football game at McLean Stadium on Saturday, but I just don't know mentally where this Texas team is going to be. I could see them going out and laying an egg on Saturday because they just almost don't have anything to play for when it comes to long-term goals. Now, on the other hand, look, you get 12 games a year, right? And this is a senior class that doesn't want to just quit. They don't want to go out like this. So I think they'll be ready. I think they'll be motivated and good to go on Saturday, but we'll see. Once again, it's a tough program that Tom Herman runs here at Texas, and the guys aren't seeing the results from it. I wonder where they're at mentally right now. Everybody knows they are actually 2-1 against the spread as an underdog this season. And the only game they lost against the spread as an underdog was to LSU. Texas was a 6.5-point dog, and they lost by 7 in that game here in Austin way back in September. Texas covered against Oklahoma. Texas covered against Iowa State this past weekend. Now, most of you probably don't care about this. That's just for the gambling man. But that goes into Tom Herman's overall record as an underdog. He's 10-3-1 against the spread as an underdog at the University of Texas. And since 2015, so dating back to Tom Herman's years at Houston, he's 15-3-1 against the spread as an underdog with 10 outright wins. Now, the problem is none of those have come this year. Right? The 3 times Texas has been a dog, they have lost outright to LSU, Oklahoma, and Iowa State. But that type of logic, and just if you know Tom Herman, if you followed him as a head coach, both here at Texas and going back to Houston, he gets his teams ready to play when they are an underdog. And that's what's happening this weekend in Baylor. Baylor's a ranked football team. They're ranked in the top 15. They're 9-1, and Texas is not expected to win. Tom Herman generally gets his teams up for games like these, and Texas plays up to the competition. Now, they also play down to the competition, as we've seen this year. We saw it last year, and we definitely saw it 2 years ago as well. But I'm curious, if the buy-in level from the players is still there, and if they're going to be listening to the normal underdog message that Tom Herman preaches to his team to get them ready for big games. Baylor's a really, really good defense, man. They're the number 1 scoring defense in this conference. I know they got walked on this past weekend, especially in the second half. They just couldn't get off the field against Oklahoma. Checking my phone to make sure I have these stats right. Yeah, Baylor, the number 1 scoring defense in the conference. And by the way, they've played a double and triple overtime game, which has inflated those stats. And they're still number 1 in scoring defense. Top 3 in total defense as well. And Texas has not played well against upper echelon defenses in this conference. So Texas to this point has played 4 of the top 5 defenses in the Big 12, of course, Baylor being the 5th. The Longhorns are 1-3 in those games, and they're scoring 10.5 points fewer than their season average in those matchups. Sam Ehlinger's not playing as well, just 6 passing touchdowns to 5 interceptions in those games, completing just 59% of his passes in those games. Texas offensively has not looked good against good defenses in this Big 12 conference. The Iowa State game last weekend, obviously TCU in Fort Worth, and it's weird to call Oklahoma a good defense, but they are a top 5 defense in the Big 12, even despite what's happened to them over the past couple of weeks. So, man, Baylor's defense is awesome. They're fundamentally sound. They do just about everything right. That is a well-coached football team. Feels kind of the opposite of what's happening here in Austin. Baylor's number 1 in scoring defense, number 1 in pass efficiency defense, number 1 in yards per play allowed, yards per carry allowed, and they also lead the Big 12 in sacks, tackles for a loss, and takeaways. So they're good on that side of the football. I don't know how you can have confidence if you're a Texas fan with what you saw last weekend in Ames. I don't know how you can feel good about this offense. More specifically, this coaching staff and their ability to come up with a good offensive game plan to go up against a better defense than what Texas saw last week. And by the way, the Longhorns on the road this year have not been good offensively. 3 true road games this year. Texas is 1-2 as a team. Their one win came in Morgantown against West Virginia, who's not very good. Texas didn't really do anything offensively until the fourth quarter in that game. I mean, it was 21-17 going into the final 15 minutes, and that was with Texas getting a whole bunch of short fields because Austin Kendall kept throwing interceptions. And obviously the TCU game, Texas never got anything going offensively. Sam Ehlinger threw a career-high 4 interceptions and then only 21 points on the road against Iowa State this past weekend. And what if you bring in the Oklahoma game? I know that's not technically a road game, but a neutral site game away from DKR. Texas struggled offensively against the Sooners too. So this coaching staff, this offense has not been able to get the job done away from DKR this season. And they're going up against probably the best defense they've seen all year. Maybe not talent-wise, maybe LSU, maybe TCU has more defensive talent than Baylor. But, man, they're so well coached, and they're disciplined. And I just gave you the numbers. They lead the conference in the majority of statistical categories this year. So this will be a tough test for this Texas offense to try to get back on track this weekend. I think it's going to be a close football game. But the difference between these two teams, they've both played a lot of close football games this year. And Tom Herman talked about it in his press conference on Monday that Texas and Baylor have had very similar seasons. And a lot of Longhorn fans will roll their eyes at that. Like they're 9-1, sitting atop the Big 12, and we're 6-4 right now, middle of the pack. But, man, the difference is Baylor's been able to win those close games. They make the plays down the stretch to win, and Texas makes the plays to lose, or they don't make the plays to win. However you want to word it, I would probably argue the former with what's happened this year. I mean, the Longhorns' 2018 season is very similar to what Baylor is doing here in 2019. Last year, Texas was 7-3 in one-possession games. This year, they're just 3-3, and Baylor has been dominant in one-score games. Obviously, they lost a one-score game last week, but they have found ways to win, and that's why they're 9-1. That's why they're sitting atop the Big 12 this year, and Texas is 2 games back at 4-3. So I'm fascinated to see where this program is at on Saturday. Do these guys, come together in this tough moment and say, man, we don't want to go out like this, even though the Big 12 championship goals are probably out of the question. We got pride. We want to play for ourselves, play for our brothers, play for our families, play for our coaches, play for whoever. Do they come out and ball out and give Baylor a tough fight on Saturday? Or do they just kind of crawl into a shell and say, man, all of our preseason goals before the year are done. Now that we lost to Iowa State, do we really care about this? That's going to be a fascinating thing to watch. I think I talked about this on Saturday in the post-game reaction video. I'm going to bring it up one more time. I think Tom Herman's tenure, his legacy, if you will, at the University of Texas is going to be defined by this offseason. What he does with his coaching staff this offseason, to be more specific. He's got to make some changes, man. I mean, 6-4 and potentially 7-5, which is what this regular season could end up at. That doesn't fly at the University of Texas, especially coming off of a 10-4 Sugar Bowl winning season when it felt like, okay, you had everything going in the right direction. That's not going to work at UT, and Tom Herman knows that, and I think he's got to make some changes to his coaching staff. I don't know if it's going to be a complete overhaul. I don't know if it's just getting rid of Todd Orlando, but man, the position coaches and the coordinators, I just don't think are getting the job done. And there's a lot of folks around here, around Austin, losing faith in Tom Herman. Look, he's going to be the head coach here next year, whether you like it or not. He's got to bring some assistants around him to help coach these kids up, help develop talent a little bit more, and just to help him focus on being a head coach. I've talked about this theory on the radio a couple of times, and I fully believe it. Tom Herman needs to bring in a play caller for next year. Now, I still want this to be Tom Herman's offense. I still think he's a great offensive mind, and I know Tom Herman's best coaching stripe on his resume is winning the national championship as a play caller at Ohio State with the third-string quarterback in Cardale Jones. But, man, so many details are falling through the cracks on game day with this Texas football team. I think if Tom Herman just hires an offensive coordinator, someone to call the plays, and brings in better position coaches, and I think that would allow him to focus more on being a sort of CEO for this program and just make sure and focus on other things that are slipping through the cracks right now. Look at Dabo Swinney at Clemson, right? I mean, a really good year 2 for him, and then in year 3, Clemson took a step back. So what does he do? He brings in Chad Morris as the offensive coordinator. The next year, I think it was the next year, he brings in Brent Venables as the defensive coordinator. He gives up on the play calling responsibilities, and now Clemson is Clemson. They're where they're at right now. They're winning national championships. They've got a good opportunity for 3 titles in 4 years this year. I don't know if Texas is quite there yet, but you see my point. Assistant coaches are very important, and as much as I like Tom Herman, the play caller, like I like the idea of that, I don't think he can focus on being a head coach and calling plays at the same time with where this program is. Some guys can do it. There's no doubt about that. Lincoln Riley does it. He does a damn good job in Oklahoma, but that doesn't mean you're a bad coach if you just don't do it. If you focus on being a head coach and you let somebody else call the plays, that doesn't necessarily make you a bad coach. I think that's something Tom Herman's going to have to consider this offseason. And he's very stubborn, as Longhorn fans know, and he thinks he's the smartest man in the room, which is a good thing. You want your coach to believe in himself and be confident in his abilities. But when it doesn't work, like it's not working here in Austin, the pressure's on you to make some changes to figure it out. I think Chris Del Conte, the athletic director at UT, he's going to give Herman a blank checkbook and say, hey, man, go out and get whatever assistance you want. I'll pay for it. Just fix this. Figure it out, and we'll see what happens. But, man, I think this offseason is huge for Tom Herman in Texas football because regardless of what happens this weekend, regardless of what happens against Texas Tech, regardless of what happens in the bowl game, this is a wasted season for the Longhorns. Now, if Texas goes out and loses those 3 and finishes the year 6-7, then people are going to be even more ticked off, and there's going to be some serious questions about the state of this program. But, man, even if Texas wins out, this should still be viewed as an epic failure of a season for Texas Longhorn football. All right, I'm trying to think. What else do I need to hit? Quick injury report. Tom Herman will be available to the media tomorrow night, so we'll do another video tomorrow or Friday. Probably not tomorrow. I'll be at the Texans-Colts game. I said that earlier. I'm sorry, guys. We'll learn about Colin Johnson. We'll learn about Anthony Cook and Junior Angalau. But at least on Monday, Tom Herman said Colin Johnson is doubtful and Anthony Cook is probably doubtful. Junior Angalau has been practicing, so maybe Texas will get its right guard back on the offensive line, which could help because, once again, Baylor #1 in the conference in sacks, and they're also able to get pressure with just their defensive line. Like, they don't have to bring a whole bunch of exotic, ridiculous blitzes from all over the field like Texas does to get pressure. And, oh, by the way, this Texas Longhorns offensive line is tied for last in the Big 12 in terms of sacks allowed. So that's a matchup that scares the hell out of me going into this weekend. Obviously, you want all hands on deck with the offensive line. You would love to get Junior Angalau back up front. Colin Johnson, though, man, I'm going to assume he's not going to play on Saturday, just from what we heard from Tom Herman. And there are insider reports from people that I've talked to saying Colin Johnson might not play again for the University of Texas, which sucks. I mean, he's a senior, so he's obviously gone after this year, but we see how much this offense suffers without having him on the football field. Maybe you can beat Texas Tech without Colin Johnson, but, man, going up against this Baylor defense without your number 1A wide receiver, if you will, however you want to pair him and Duvernay, that's going to be a tall task for this Texas offense to get the job done this weekend. So we'll see what happens with Colin Johnson dealing with nagging hamstring injuries. He's a Sunday player. Wonder what his motivation level is going to be to come back, considering Texas doesn't really have a whole lot to play for, if we're being completely honest. So don't mean that as a shot at Colin Johnson. Just he's got injuries. We'll see what happens with the hamstring, but I don't expect him to play on Saturday night. What am I missing here? Should we switch over to basketball? Have I depressed y'all enough with some Texas football conversation here on a Wednesday? I'm going to wrap this up kind of soon. Got to go watch Luka on ESPN. And the return of Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi and Paul George going to play with each other for the first... Oh, that sounds weird. They're going to play together for the first time tonight on the Los Angeles Clippers. That's the ESPN NBA doubleheader. Got a buddy who's at the American Airlines Center in Dallas right now watching the Mavs-Warriors game. Says there's not a whole lot of Warriors fans there this year. much fewer than what there have been over the last couple of years. I wonder why that is. Let's talk some Texas basketball real quick before we get out of here. Appreciate all of y'all for tuning in tonight. Texas basketball takes on Georgetown tomorrow at Madison Square Garden, part of the 2K Classic. The Longhorns 4 to 4.5 point favorites against Georgetown in this matchup tomorrow. And the winner of this one will likely get Duke. Duke plays Cal in the other half of this 4-team bracket. Duke's the number 1 team in the country. Cal is okay, but I think most people expect Duke to win this game. Let me see if I can find the line for Duke-Cal. Duke's a 19-point favorite tomorrow. So the winner of Texas-Georgetown more than likely going to be playing the Duke Blue Devils. Now then again, if Evansville can beat number 1 Kentucky on the road, then maybe Duke can lose to Cal at Madison Square Garden. But I digress. Excited, man. I mean, it's the flavor of the month, right? Everybody is ticked off and kind of over Texas football around these parts. And basketball's 4-0. And they're ranked number 22 in the country, mainly in part due to their victory over Purdue a couple of weeks ago, or I guess last weekend on the road. That was a nice win for Texas. This team's 4-0. Georgetown will be a pretty good test for the Longhorns. Georgetown has a really, really good backcourt. Mac McClung, a sophomore, very good athlete. Very good athlete. He's a white guy. He's one of those white guys you watch and like, oh, damn. White man can jump. This guy could play. He was an all-freshman last year in the Big East Conference. He's really, really talented. Also, Josh Akinjo, the other guard in the starting lineup for Patrick Ewing's Hoya's team. Akinjo, preseason second team All-Big East. So they've got some talented guards, but the one player that Georgetown has that concerns me if I'm a Texas fan is their 7-footer Omer Yurtseven, who is, 7-footer, Yurtseven is his last name. He's an NC State transfer. He's Turkish, if I'm not mistaken, and he's good. He's the leading scorer, leading rebounder, leading shot blocker. He's really talented. He's got soft hands. He's got some nice moves down on the low block, and he can score. He really can. And Texas's weakness this year is its front court. It's their bigs. This will be a tough task for Jericho Sims, and if Jericho Sims gets into foul trouble tomorrow, I'm not sure what Texas is going to do to try to stop this Yurt-7 cat. Maybe they'll double him immediately, but not a whole lot of depth on the front line for this Texas basketball team. It's a tall task for Jericho Sims, and if it's Will Baker or somebody else, Royce Ham, I don't know who it's going to be trying to shut down this dude. This will be a test. Probably the best offensive big man the Longhorns have seen this year. I know Matt Harms for Purdue is pretty good too, but I'm curious to see how the Longhorns fare with that matchup down on the low block. I think Texas is the better team than Georgetown. Georgetown picked to finish 6th in the Big East this year, and they've already lost a game. They lost to Penn State. They got killed by a middle-of-the-road Big Ten Penn State team. I think Texas should win tomorrow night, but we've got our hopes up with Texas basketball. Every time that happens, they generally let us down. So I would love to see Texas get the job done tomorrow because the Duke game would be a big-time measuring stick for this basketball team. Are they as good as Duke? No, definitely not. But we've seen Texas basketball play with some of the top teams in the country over the last couple of years. Now, it's early in the season. It's not in the NCAA tournament because they just can't find their way to the tournament consistently. But that will be a good measuring stick game to see where Shaka Smart's program is in year 5 and to see if Texas is a legitimate NCAA tournament team this year. I'm not ready to call them a contender. I don't think anybody is by any stretch. But, man, if they can hold their own, if they can beat Georgetown and at least play well against Duke, you'd like to think that, okay, the Longhorns can at least make it to the dance this year, which is something that's avoided them a couple of times in the Shaka Smart era. So, excited to watch that one tomorrow. Once again, hopefully we get a Texas-Duke matchup on Friday. That should be fun. Hopefully more fun than the, 07 matchup when Duke was number 1 and Texas was number 2. And they beat the Horns by 30 or 40, something crazy like that. I don't know. Should be fun. Basketball season is here. Excited for that. And obviously football, Texas and Baylor coming up on Saturday. So, thank you. I think I'm done. To the few of you who are watching tonight, I appreciate the love. Always do. Please like this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel for all things Texas Longhorn football, basketball, baseball all year long. Texas volleyball, I think, playing Baylor. It's a top 3 matchup in the country tonight. Battle for first place in the Big 12. So if If you've got ESPN Plus, you're a volleyball fan, you're a Texas fan, whatever, you get a little appetizer for the football game on Saturday with some volleyball in Waco tonight. But thank y'all for watching. As always, appreciate the love. Once again, comment below if you're watching this video after it's posted. And until next time, y'all have a good night.